welcome everybody. Yes, as mentioned, I work at the University of Sydney Business School, and it is our tradition in Australia to acknowledge the lands on which we come from when we're delivering or when we're meeting together. And it's I would like to acknowledge that I'm currently in Sydney on the lands of the Wangal people of the Eora Nation. These lands were never ceded. They belong to the original owners, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditions and the custodianship of these lands. So it's my delight to be here today to be the keynote. I've got quite a few things to share. I apologize in advance if I start to speak really fast when I realize I'm running out of time. I will start this timer. I've got my Twitter handle at the bottom there. If you are tweeting, feel free to tag me in. So as was said at the beginning, you know, we were probably all here involved in large class teaching in some way, either delivering, designing, supporting. So my presentation, feel free to, I'll ask some questions. Feel free to write your answers in the chat if you like. You know, some of you might like to be, you might be, you know, multitaskers who like to listen and chat at the same time. Please feel free to do that. Or if you like to just sit back and listen, that's fine too. So we all know what's happening, as it has been happening for quite a few years now, decades. You know, our university enrollments are rising rapidly, and this brings, you know, whilst this brings widening participation, it also brings a large diversity of the student cohort. For example, and we all love a good acronym, so USBS is the University of Sydney Business School. Some of our big courses, our Master of Commerce, for example, has 73% of those students are international students. And so these large cohorts are very diverse and not always the easiest thing to teach. But what I'm going to talk to you a little bit today is we'll look at pros and cons of large class teaching. We'll look at a bit of research that I did with a colleague a few years ago, where we looked into experiential learning. Whilst everybody knows that experiential learning can be very beneficial, it can be also seen as quite difficult to do in a large class setting. So, you know, want us to think about how can we harness some of the benefits and some of the opportunities of large classes and delivering active and collaborative learning to large classes, rather than what can tend to happen when we go large is that we revert to very didactic delivery methods because it's easier, and there's so many other things happening that, you know, we don't have time to experiment and do the more innovative approaches that we possibly would like to do and can do in smaller cohorts. Educational technology, of course, I know we've got some technologists in the audience, which is fantastic. It can really help us when we're delivering at scale. It's not the only answer, of course, but, you know, there are certainly ways in which we can support or deal with some of the issues with technology. So, you know, traditionally, teaching is it always has been and probably still is quite a siloed activity. You know, we design the curriculum, we might engage with some stakeholders to get input and feedback, but primarily we decide what's going into the curriculum and we deliver it individually. And it has been quite a reductionist. There's a school of thought that it's quite reductionist. You know, we want to give some content or some knowledge and share that with our students. We want them to learn and grow, and we want to meet our outcomes. But, you know, what I'd like to think about today is how do we go about turning that sort of siloed approach into a more networked approach and a more collaborative approach to sort of work with others and, you know, provide sort of sustainable solutions and quite, you know, as well as being impactful. So I did a little bit of research a couple of years ago with a colleague, Lilia Mantai, and we talked to around 100 academics who taught large classes, and we tried to obviously find out from them, what they were doing, what were their challenges, what were the benefits, were there any benefits to teaching large classes? And what we found a lot of things, and you can read more about that in our paper, but we really found that academics had still held on to this, we called it a romantic idea of being able to have this direct relationship with all of their students. And they felt that that was what made for quality teaching. And if, as cohorts grew, there was this real sort of anxiety that they were losing touch with their students. They didn't know all of their students. They didn't have this relationship, and they felt like they were losing control. And, this sort of leads to sort of burnout, feeling overworked. And, we did talk to them about, there's often a question around, well, how big is big, and what do you mean by big? And, we talked to teachers about this, and the number that came out was around about 50, and you might care to share in the chat perhaps what your large class looked like. I had mentioned before around 400 students in a cohort. Typically at the University of Sydney Business School, we have cohorts of between 1,000 and 2,000 students in a class. And, when we're talking about being sort of overloaded and feeling anxiety and frustration and burnout, these large classes do take a large toll. But we did ask about whether there were benefits, and I'll come to that in a moment. But I think overall from that piece of research, we there really was this feel that we need to recognize that it shouldn't be just one person responsible for these large cohorts, and that it is a networked activity. You might be familiar with networked learning. We sort of coined this idea that teaching should be networked as well, and often is. It's probably that we just don't acknowledge it enough. So it's about this idea of moving away from the educator as a central role to being more of a sort of a facilitator and a coordinator of many different other people and roles to create this experience and this high quality experience. And it does take a shift in thinking, because it isn't the traditional way of thinking about teaching. But I think when people get on board with that, there's and we'll talk about who these different actors are. So I keep referring to benefits, and I know sometimes the benefits come later when we reflect and we think about what happens. But also in that research study, our participants did talk a little bit about two main areas. One was around the sort of pedagogy and how you can harness the benefit of the crowd to use different technologies and harness that diversity. How they felt like they were giving back to society in terms of being able to deliver high quality education to a wider range and through the bigger cohorts. And also they did cite certain sort of personal rewards and professional benefits through talking to us about, it might not be immediate. They might feel burnt out and overworked, and it's really hard to do. But when they look back, they were more, they won awards for their teaching. They felt like their skill sets grew through being involved in this sort of networked activity. So another term for this idea of network teaching is a term that you've probably heard quite a lot lately. It's certainly become quite popular. And so the idea of network teaching, so teaching with others or having others involved in the teaching process or the design process is called I call co-design. And I am very lucky to lead an amazing team called the Business Co-Design Team. And I'll talk more about them in a moment. But a couple of definitions of what is co-design. So there's this one here specifically about co-design in education, about bringing these different players together, possibly to design a solution to a problem or an educational problem or a need. This is another definition which talks about this active and collaborative participation from a variety of stakeholders in the process. And this quote comes as a direct quote from the design literature. Again, talks about collaboration, connection, bringing different skills and knowledge together. And many people, as I said, co-design has become quite a popular term that's bandied around at the moment. And there are certain things that I would say co-design is not. And so, for example, asking your students for feedback on your teaching, inviting a speaker to present in your class and bringing industry perspective into your presentations, peer observation, asking colleagues for feedback on your teaching. All of these are fantastic and definitely needed to deliver high quality teaching, but they're not co-design. And I'll say a little bit more why, but other sort of naming conventions that you're probably familiar with or heard that have a similar kind of approach or ideas behind them to co-design, this idea of being participatory, user experience, design, students as partners, for example. I think what really underpins all of this idea about what co-design is, it's that, particularly with education, is that the learners are part of the journey. So they're not just called in to consult, but they're really part of the stage moving through the learning journey. So they contribute to the design that you come up with. And so, of course, this means it has to be iterative, because you can't just, we're not just asking for different people to give us feedback and then we design it and then we deliver it and then ask them for feedback at the end. It is a participative and an iterative process. So basically, in short, benefits of co-design, which again is, I think, similar to network teaching, is, you can really sort of build motivations, you can build learning, so the people who are involved in this network or in this co-design process, they can learn and they can grow. And you can learn from them as well. So it's even professional development for yourself. So I'll frame a little bit. So I've, talked all about what I think about these things, but I'll tell you a little bit in relation to this sort of large scale project that I lead with the team. And really, it's ultimately about how we transform the student experience in these large cohorts. It's through cycles of improvement. It's a funded project, and we often refer to this idea in Sydney about painting the harbour bridge. It is iterative, because by the time you've painted and improved, this huge thing being this large cohort, this class, by the time you've got to the end, it might maybe take a couple of years, and then you start again, you paint it again. So I'll talk to you a little bit about those cycles. We will do work. I'll talk to you about the stakeholders that we engage with. And we do try and take this an appreciative inquiry approach, in terms of starting with the teaching and looking at what's working well and building on that. So we're not saying, we've got the answers to all of your problems in large class teaching, let's throw it all out and start follow these steps and you'll have this amazing class. We really try to work together, and this is that co-design element where everybody brings their knowledge and skills to the table. So the project is called Connected Learning at Scale. It was originated by my boss, who is Professor Peter Bryant. He's the Associate Dean Education at the Business School. And we, our students who are part of these huge cohorts, we have 14,000 students in the Business School, and around, depends on how many, we've probably got around 300 permanent academic staff and probably about 1,000 casual staff. And we are pretty bad on student feedback. Students were telling us that they didn't feel connected, they didn't feel like they belonged to the university, they didn't feel like they met anybody in the Business School, even though there was 1,000 people in their class and never met anyone except the person sitting next to them. They, said they felt lonely. They felt that the delivery methods didn't suit their sort of contemporary learning needs. And this was all before COVID as well. Like this project started in 2019. So it wasn't just because we'd been remote and online that they were feeling this disconnection. So as I said, our classes are huge. Average, a small class might be considered to be about 400 students, would be, quite a small class at the Business School. And in terms of how we approach this, I'm not going to go into any, I don't have time to go into detail, and I can share some websites with you if you want to look at the nitty-gritty of what we actually did in the project. I'm going to take a bit more of a holistic view. But in terms of our co-design, we really try, we have these different sort of levels. We call them deep, medium, and light. So for example, a deep touch unit would go through a year and a half working with us. So 3 cycles. So our semesters are around 6 months, say. A medium touch would get 6 months, so 1 cycle with us would be like 1 semester. And then the light touch would be maybe around 6 weeks on something small, some small changes. And in terms of our team and who makes up our co-design or our network, if you like, the coloured spokes of the wheel are some of the people and the roles in the co-design teams. We have learning technologists, we have educational researchers who do evaluation as well. We have educational developers who are academic roles. We have learning designers, and we have a media team and some media labs, studios. And then the bottom spokes are our 3 main stakeholder groups, I suppose. Obviously, our students, our teachers, our educators who are our content experts, and also we try and bring along the industry practitioners who, when we're lucky, are also alumni of the particular unit that we're designing. And so the process that we go through, you're probably quite familiar, and if you all design your own teaching or you support others who design, you'll be familiar with this terminology. And whether you do this alone or whether you do this as part of a team, I'm sure you all go through these steps, possibly without thinking about it, without naming it, but this is what the processes that we go through. So we start off with that big picture ideation. So this is based on sort of design thinking and educational development terminology. So we look at, what data have we got to go on, what information, let's think big, some blue sky thinking, what would we love to do better and improve upon? And then we go through the sort of design phase, which can be iterative itself in terms of getting feedback from different stakeholders. The stakeholders are part of the design. We might test something, we might build some prototypes, refine them, see if they work, implement them in the classroom, deliver them, observe how it works, collect some data from students or some learning management system data. And then, through the reflection process or evaluation, we would get feedback from students and build that into the cycle. And we might then repeat that, depending whether it was a deep or a medium or a light touch, we would go through these processes multiple times. Co-designing, it all sounds very great, and so does network teaching, but there's, as we said, there are, it's not always straightforward. The more people you get around a table, the more characters you've got in the room, as well as the benefits of bringing all these skills together. You've also got different people and their wants and their needs at play. So I asked my team, if there was, what would you say was the hardest thing about co-design? And these are some of the things that they came up with. Just let that run through. You might like to add in the chat, what do you, if you're involved in co-design, what do you find difficult about it? And so for me, this last one, I think I added the last one, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but really is, I think, about thinking differently about the way we work, moving away from this siloed effect and moving towards the we, and that we own the teaching and the learning experience, and what can we do together, rather than it all having to be in a solo. So I had to think about, for me as the manager of this big project, and about trying to encourage co-design practices. What are the challenges for me? And personally, what I find difficult is getting buy-in sometimes from the discipline. They're very, oh no, our teaching is fine, thank you, we don't need your help. we're good as we are, and we don't want to do that thing that you're doing. And they don't realize that it's not that thing that we want to do, it's that thing that we want to do with you, that we want to help you do. So we find that bigger projects are actually sometimes easier because we have more time to work with people and build those relationships and build the trust. We do struggle sometimes with different teaching styles because our big units, a different coordinator might teach it one semester and then it hands over to another person the second semester, and they have different styles, and they don't want to, if we've only worked with one person, then they don't want to teach in that way, and they want to change it and do something completely different. So we try and get both sets of teachers and teaching teams involved in the co-design process. And when we withdraw our supports, we might have worked with them for 18 months, and then we sort of say, okay, now it's off you go and fly away and teach this great new course that we've designed. But sometimes we find that they tend to revert back to their old ways because they've no longer got our team around to support them. So that, thinking a lot about that and how we work together. And I know I'm coming to the end, but just 2 more slides. I think it's really important to share these practices. We do have, I'll put this in the chat in a moment, but we have this wonderful site where we've developed design patterns. So we've looked at all of these changes across all of the units that we've worked with, and then we've tried to present them in a sort of a template format so that you could apply this to different contexts. We've given examples of how these patterns play out across different disciplines within the business school, for example. But I think it's really important to celebrate the participation of being involved in a co-design project. It does take a lot of effort, but I think that people who do get involved in this should be celebrated and rewarded. So how could we do it better? Well, I think it's really important to think about perceptions. So as I said, people often think that we're coming in to help or work with them and co-design with them, and we're bringing our ideas and we're saying this is what you should do. But it's really not about that. It's about us working together to investigate what we could do better together. So yeah, in terms of managing expectations, making people feel very welcome into the project or into the collaboration, and that celebration of their involvement. And so it's about moving beyond, I'm doing this for the students, being very transactional, but also about doing it with the stakeholders, so involving them in the process along the way. And I'd be keen to hear any suggestions that you might have. You could drop them into the chat if you've got great ideas, and I know we might talk about that at the end of the day today. So finally, takeaways, if you're thinking about network teaching or co-design, think about, what skills or what are you lacking, what things might you need to help you in this process, and then, identify, well, who do I know who I could invite into this process, or could I open it up and ask, I need this kind of skill, or I think I need to do this, or who'd like to come and join me to co-design this together. And think about, what might motivate them to be part of that. Some people like to do research. It might be that you co-design together and you can, build that into a bit of a research project, or you could, present it at a conference about how you've co-designed. But I think even though it does take a longer time to co-design, I do believe that the reward is you get a deeper and more meaningful and more authentic student experience at the end of that. And I do think it's worthwhile. So I think that's it from me. Thank you very much. I think hopefully there's time for a few questions. I do have one shameless plug before I finish. I am guest editing a special issue on large class teaching in the Journal of Work Applied Management. So if anyone's interested in that, I'll also put that call for papers in the chat, and please feel free to check it out and contact me if you've got questions about possibly writing for that special issue. I think the deadline is early October, so plenty of time to get something in for that. All right, thank you very much.